Thunder of hoofbeats echoed from the canyon behind her. Sarah Henderson dragged the bleeding Apache warrior behind her wagon, his dead weight nearly crushing her as dust clouds rose on the horizon. The cavalry patrol would crest that ridge in minutes, and here she was, harboring their escaped prisoner. "Tomorrow night," the warrior gasped against her shoulder, his English startling her. "Hundreds will die. Cedar Ridge." Her blood turned to ice. Cedar Ridge, the harvest festival. Every family in 3 counties would be there. As she hauled him toward her cabin, his torn shirt fell open, revealing a distinctive scar across his chest. 3 parallel claw marks. Sarah's breath caught. She'd seen that exact scar before, burned into her memory from the worst day of her life. The Apache who'd killed her husband Thomas bore those same marks. The warrior's eyes fluttered open, meeting hers with desperate intelligence. You're the woman from the Henderson place. Thomas spoke of you." Sarah's world tilted. "You knew my husband? He saved my sister's life 2 winters ago. Gave her medicine when she was dying." His voice cracked. "I tried to stop them from raiding your farm. I was too late." The hoofbeats grew louder. Through the cabin window she could see dust plumes, at least 6 riders, maybe more. "They tortured me for 3 days, he whispered urgently. "Made me tell them about the attack plans. But I escaped before I could reveal where my people hide." Sarah's hands shook as she pressed a cloth to his wounds. The same man whose people had destroyed her life was now begging her to save his. "The children," he gasped. "If the soldiers find our camp first, they'll kill the children too." Shouts erupted outside. "Search every building. He can't have gone far with those injuries." Sarah looked down at the Apache warrior, at the man whose knowledge could prevent a massacre, but whose capture would doom his innocent family. Her husband's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes mercy is the hardest choice, but it's the only one that matters." Heavy boots struck her porch. "Ma'am, we're looking for a dangerous Apache fugitive. Mind if we search your property?" Sarah's heart hammered as she yanked a heavy quilt over the unconscious warrior, then wiped the blood from her hands on her apron. She opened the door to find Colonel Morrison himself, his weathered face grim beneath his cavalry hat. "Colonel," she managed, forcing steadiness into her voice, "what brings you out this way?" "Escaped prisoner, ma'am. Tortured 3 of my men before he got away." Morrison's cold eyes swept past her into the cabin. "Real savage. Goes by David among the mission folk, but his Apache name means eternal flower. Ironic for a killer. Ayana." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. This man bleeding beneath her quilt had a name that meant eternal flower. "Haven't seen anyone, Colonel," she lied, praying her voice wouldn't betray her. "Just been tending my vegetable garden." Morrison's sergeant, a brutal-looking man with rope burns on his knuckles, stepped forward. "Mind if we take a look around? Won't take but a minute." "Of course not." Sarah stepped aside, her mouth dry as dust. The soldiers tramped through her small cabin, overturning furniture and checking corners. The sergeant's boots stopped inches from where Ayana lay hidden. "Strange," Morrison muttered, crouching near the quilt. "These floorboards look damp." Sarah's pulse roared in her ears. "Roof leaked during the last storm. Still haven't fixed it properly." The colonel stood slowly, his suspicious gaze boring into her. "If you see anything at all, you send word immediately. This Apache has information that could save lives. Or end them," Sarah thought as the soldiers finally departed. She waited until their hoofbeats faded before pulling back the quilt. Ayana's fever had worsened, and infection reddened the edges of his wounds. "David," she whispered, using his English name. "Can you hear me?" His eyes cracked open. "Sarah Henderson. Thomas always said you were stronger than you looked." "Don't talk, you're burning up." She fetched cool water and clean rags. "I need to know exactly when this attack happens. Tomorrow night, when the harvest moon rises full." His voice was barely a whisper. "My war chief, he planned it when the white families would be celebrating their defenses down." Sarah's blood chilled. The festival would draw every family for miles around. Children, elderly folks, everyone gathered in one place. "Why are you telling me this? These are your people." Ayana's fevered eyes filled with anguish. "Because Thomas taught me something before he died. He said hatred only breeds more hatred, that someone has to choose a different path. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "The soldiers will come back. They know you're wounded." "I know." He struggled to sit up. "That's why I have to leave tonight. You can barely breathe, let alone walk. If they catch me here, they'll hang you too." His hand found hers, burning with fever. "But first, you have to promise me something." Sarah met his desperate gaze. "What?" "Don't let them slaughter my people. When the soldiers learn about the attack, they'll kill everyone in our camp. Women, children, elders who had nothing to do with this war." The weight of his request settled over her like a mountain. How could she save both sides when each saw the other as monsters? That night, as Ayana slept fitfully, Sarah sat by her window watching the moon rise. Tomorrow it would be full, casting its orange light over either celebration or slaughter. She'd made her choice. At dawn, she would ride. The desert stretched endlessly before Sarah as her horse picked its way through the rocky terrain. Ayana's whispered directions guided her toward the Apache camp, hidden deep in the Dragoon Mountains. Behind her, smoke rose from Cedar Ridge, where the townspeople prepared for their festival, oblivious to the death that would come with moonrise. She'd left Ayana sleeping in her root cellar, with enough supplies to last 3 days. If she failed to return, he'd at least have a chance to escape when his strength returned. The sound of rushing water led her to a hidden canyon, where aspens grew thick and green. She'd found it, the place Ayana called home. "Hold it right there, white woman." Sarah's horse reared as 3 Apache warriors emerged from the rocks, their rifles trained on her. She raised her hands slowly, heart pounding. "I'm here about Ayana," she called out in English, hoping someone would understand. "David, the one you know as David." The warriors exchanged rapid words in their own language. The youngest, barely more than a boy, stepped forward. "You know our brother? Where is he?" "Safe, but not for long." Sarah dismounted carefully. "I need to speak with your chief. It's about tomorrow night." They bound her hands and led her deeper into the canyon, where dozens of wickiups dotted the valley floor. Children playing among the shelters stopped to stare at the strange white woman. Elderly faces peered from doorways, with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. At the canyon's heart stood a large dwelling where smoke rose from a central fire. The warriors pushed Sarah inside, where a man in his 50s sat cross-legged on a colorful blanket. His weathered face bore the same strong features as Ayana, and Sarah knew she faced the war chief himself. "I am Nal Nish," he said in accented English. "You say you know my son. Your son is dying in my cabin because he tried to prevent a war that will destroy your people." The chief's eyes flashed dangerously. "You lie. My son leads our warriors against your people tomorrow night." "No." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "He escaped from the soldiers to warn me, to stop the attack before it dooms everyone in this canyon." Nalnish rose slowly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "Why should I believe the words of a white woman?" "Because he told me about the scar on his chest, about how he got it protecting his sister from a mountain lion when she was 6 years old." Sarah's voice didn't waver. "Because he said his father once dreamed of peace, but buried that dream when the soldiers came." The chief's hand stilled. "Only family would know such intimate details." "Even if I believed you," Nalnish said carefully, "it changes nothing. Your people have taken our lands, killed our families. Tomorrow we take back what was stolen, and the day after that, they'll come with cannons and burn this place to the ground." Sarah stepped closer. "With your children inside." Murmurs rippled through the assembled warriors. An elderly woman pushed forward, her face creased with worry. "She speaks truth, my brother," the woman said in broken English. "I have seen the white soldiers' anger. They do not count coup. They kill everything that moves." Silence, Itzel. But Nalnish's voice lacked conviction. Sarah pressed her advantage. "Your son risked everything to warn me because he knew what would happen next. The soldiers won't just hunt your war party, they'll hunt all of you." The chief was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he looked up, Sarah saw the weight of leadership heavy in his eyes. "What do you propose, white woman?" "Let me ride to Cedar Ridge. Let me warn them to increase their guards, to postpone the festival. If your warriors find the town defended, they'll retreat. No blood spilled, no reason for revenge. And what of justice for our dead? What of our stolen lands?" Sarah took a deep breath. What if there was another way? What if instead of war, we tried something that's never been attempted? Speak. A meeting. Your representatives and ours. Trade instead of raids. Boundaries both sides can live with. The words tumbled out faster now. Your son could translate, help both sides understand each other. Several warriors laughed harshly, but Nalnish held up his hand for silence. You ask me to trust people who have shown us nothing but betrayal. I ask you to trust your son's judgment. He chose to save lives rather than take them. The chief walked to the dwelling's entrance and stared out at his people. Children chased each other between the shelters while their mothers ground corn and tended fires. It was a scene of peace that tomorrow's attack would shatter forever. If I agree to this, he said finally, and your people betray us again, my son's blood will be on your hands as well as mine. If we don't try, everyone's blood will be on all our hands. Nalnish nodded slowly. Take 6 of my fastest riders. Reach your town before sunset. If they agree to meet with us, truly meet, not another trap, we will come in peace. And if they refuse, the chief's eyes hardened, then we die as warriors, not as victims. As Sarah rode hard toward Cedar Ridge with her unlikely escort, the sun blazed overhead like a furnace. She had perhaps 4 hours to convince an entire town to trust their ancient enemies. The festival preparations came into view just as shadows began lengthening across the desert. Colorful banners fluttered between buildings, and the sound of laughter drifted on the evening breeze. Families had traveled for days to be here, and Sarah was about to tell them their celebration might become a funeral. Wait here, she told her Apache escorts, gesturing toward a grove of cottonwoods outside town. If shooting starts, ride back to your people. The youngest warrior, who'd introduced himself as Kai, shook his head. We stay. If you speak truth, we witness it. If you lie, we die with honor. Sarah's throat tightened. These weren't the savage monsters she'd been taught to fear. They were young men willing to risk everything for peace. She rode down Cedar Ridge's main street as townspeople stopped their preparations to stare. Whispers followed her progress. Isn't that the Henderson widow? What's she doing here? Looks like she's seen a ghost. Sheriff Williams emerged from his office, concern creasing his weathered features. Sarah, what brings you to town in such a hurry? Sheriff, I need to speak with you and Mayor Patterson immediately. It's about tonight. Something in her tone made him nod grimly. They're at the schoolhouse, going over the festival schedule. The schoolhouse buzzed with activity as committee members arranged tables and decorated the stage. Mayor Patterson, a portly man in his 50s, looked up with a smile that faded when he saw Sarah's expression. Mrs. Henderson, not like you to come to town for festivities. I'm here to save lives. Sarah's blunt words silenced the room. There's going to be an Apache attack tonight during the festival. Chaos erupted. Women screamed, men shouted questions, and children began crying. Sheriff Williams fired his pistol into the air. Quiet! Let her speak! Sarah quickly explained about finding Ayana, the planned attack, and her desperate ride to the Apache camp. She left out nothing except the warrior's location. You expect us to believe, Mayor Patterson sputtered, that Apaches suddenly want peace after all they've done. I expect you to believe that your children's lives are worth more than your hatred. How do we know this isn't a trap? Demanded Jim Crawford, whose brother had died in an Apache raid 2 years earlier. How do we know you weren't followed? Because I brought proof. Sarah turned toward the door. Sheriff, would you escort me outside? There are 6 Apache warriors waiting to speak with you. The room fell dead silent. You brought hostile Apaches to our town. Patterson's face turned purple. I brought ambassadors who risked their lives for peace. Sheriff Williams, a practical man who'd seen too much bloodshed, nodded slowly. Let's hear what they have to say. The crowd followed them outside, where Kai and his companions sat motionless on their horses. Evening shadows stretched long across the dusty street, and Sarah realized they were almost out of time. My name is Kai, the young warrior said in careful English. I speak for Chief Nalnish of the Chiricahua people. We come in peace. Speak your peace, Williams said, his hand resting on his gun butt. Our war chief offers trade instead of war, meeting instead of killing. Your people need horses, blankets, knowledge of desert water. Our people need metal tools, medicine, safe passage for hunting. And why should we trust anything you say? Crawford stepped forward aggressively. Because, Kai said simply, we are here. 6 warriors could have killed many of you before you knew we were here. Instead, we offer words. Sarah seized the moment. They're proposing something that's never been tried. Actual negotiation. Representatives from both sides meeting to establish boundaries and trade agreements. Where? Sheriff Williams asked. Neutral ground. The old Spanish mission ruins halfway between here and their camp. Tomorrow at dawn. And if we refuse? Kai's expression didn't change. Then many will die tonight. Your people and mine. The crowd murmured anxiously. Sarah could see the fear in their faces, but also something else. Hope. Mayor Patterson mopped his sweating forehead. How do we know you won't just use this meeting to learn our defenses? Because we already know your defenses, another warrior spoke up. We have watched your town for weeks. If we wanted to attack, you would already be dead. The brutal honesty sent chills through the crowd. What guarantee do we have? Williams pressed. The same guarantee you offer us, Kai replied. None, only trust. Sarah stepped forward. Sheriff, I've seen their camp. They have children, families, elders, people who just want to survive. This attack tonight would bring the cavalry down on everyone, innocent or not. And what about our innocence? Crawford demanded. What about my brother? What about Thomas Henderson? Sarah's voice broke slightly. What about them? Will killing more people bring them back, or will it just create more widows like me? The crowd fell silent, moved by her pain. Sheriff Williams looked around at the faces surrounding him, his neighbors, his friends, people he'd sworn to protect. I can't make this decision alone. We need to vote. All in favor of meeting with the Apache delegation tomorrow at dawn, he called out. Hands rose slowly across the crowd. Sarah held her breath as she counted. It was close. Perhaps 30 hands out of 60 people. All opposed. More hands rose, but fewer than before. Motion carries, Williams announced. God help us all, but we're going to try talking instead of shooting. As the Apache riders departed and the crowd dispersed to spread the news, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Mrs. Crawford, Jim's wife, tears streaming down her face. You did the right thing, the older woman whispered. I'm tired of burying people I love. But as Sarah rode back toward her homestead in the gathering darkness, she wondered if she'd prevented a massacre or simply delayed it. Tomorrow's meeting would either mark the beginning of peace or the end of everything she'd worked for. The moon rose full and orange behind her, casting eerie shadows across the desert. Somewhere in that wilderness, Ayanna waited in pain and darkness, trusting her to save both their peoples. She just prayed she was strong enough to succeed. Sarah found Ayanna sitting by her kitchen window, pale but alert, watching the orange moon rise over the desert. He'd managed to drag himself up from the root cellar, despite his injuries. You came back, he said softly. I promised I would. Sarah poured him water from a clay pitcher. Your father agreed to the meeting. And your people? Barely. The vote was close. She settled into the chair across from him. Ayanna, what happens if this fails? What happens if someone shoots first tomorrow? He was quiet for a long moment, studying the moonlight on his hands. Then we all die. But at least we'll die trying for something better. Your father said you were supposed to lead the attack tonight. I was. His voice carried deep shame. I spent 2 years planning it, choosing the perfect moment when your defenses would be weakest. I knew every guard rotation, every escape route. Sarah shuddered. What changed your mind? Your husband. Ayanna met her eyes. The last thing he said to me was that hatred was a poison that killed the one who carried it. I didn't understand then. And now I see what it's done to my people. We've become so focused on revenge that we've forgotten how to live. He struggled to his feet, wincing. I need to be at that meeting tomorrow. You can barely stand. I'm the only one who speaks both languages fluently. Without me, they'll just talk past each other until someone gets angry and starts shooting. Sarah knew he was right, but the thought of him riding in his condition terrified her. The soldiers are still looking for you. If Colonel Morrison sees you at that meeting, then we'll deal with that when it happens. Ayanna moved carefully toward the door. Right now, I need to get to my people. They need to know the meeting is real. Wait! Sarah grabbed her medical supplies and a fresh shirt. At least let me bandage those wounds properly. As she worked by lamplight, cleaning and dressing his injuries, Sarah found herself studying his face. The man who'd haunted her nightmares for 3 years had become someone entirely different, someone willing to sacrifice everything for peace. "Why did you really try to stop the raid on my farm?" she asked quietly. Ayana was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke. "Because Thomas had shown my sister kindness when she was dying. Because he was the first white man who ever looked at me and saw a person instead of a threat." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I knew that killing him would make me exactly what he said I didn't have to be." Sarah's hands stilled on the bandage. "But you didn't stop them." "No, I arrived too late. By the time I got there, it was over." His eyes filled with pain. "I held your husband while he died. His last words were about you, that you were strong enough to choose love over hatred if someone just gave you the chance." Tears blurred Sarah's vision. "He said that? He made me promise to tell you someday. I never thought I'd get the chance." Sarah finished the bandaging in silence, her mind reeling. Thomas had died believing in the possibility of peace, and now she was the one trying to make that impossible dream real. "There's something else," Ayana said as she helped him into the clean shirt. "The attack tonight wasn't just about revenge. My father is dying." Sarah's head snapped up. "Dying? Lung sickness. The medicine man says he has maybe 2 months." Ayana's voice cracked. This attack was supposed to be his final victory, his legacy. Without it, maybe his legacy can be peace instead of war. Ayana smiled sadly. "You sound like your husband." As dawn approached, Sarah helped Ayana onto her gentlest horse. He was still weak, but determination burned in his eyes. "If this goes wrong," she began. "It won't," but his hand shook as he gathered the reins. "Sarah, whatever happens today, I want you to know that meeting you has given me hope for the first time in years." She watched him ride toward the mountains until he disappeared into the gray pre-dawn light, then began her own journey to the old Spanish mission. The ruins stood stark against the lightening sky, crumbling adobe walls bearing witness to another civilization's attempt to bridge 2 worlds. Sarah arrived to find both delegations already there, eyeing each other with barely concealed suspicion. Chief Nalnish sat tall on his horse, despite his obvious illness, flanked by 6 warriors including Kai. Sheriff Williams represented the townspeople with Mayor Patterson, Jim Crawford, and 3 other prominent citizens. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Where's your translator?" Williams asked Sarah as she dismounted. Before she could answer, hoofbeats echoed from the canyon. Ayana appeared, sitting straighter in his saddle than his injuries should have allowed. "My son," Chief Nalnish said quietly, and Sarah heard both pride and relief in his voice. But as Ayana approached, another sound filled the morning air, the thunder of many horses moving fast. Colonel Morrison and 24 cavalry soldiers crested the ridge, rifles ready. "Nobody move!" Morrison shouted. "I've got that escaped Apache in my sights." The careful balance Sarah had worked so hard to create shattered in an instant. Apache warriors reached for weapons, townspeople dove for cover behind rocks, and Morrison's soldiers spread out in attack formation. "Wait!" Sarah stepped into the open space between the 2 groups. "This is a peace meeting." "Stand aside, Mrs. Henderson," Morrison commanded. "That Apache is a dangerous fugitive. That Apache is the reason you're not burying half of Cedar Ridge today." Sheriff Williams rose slowly from behind a boulder. "Colonel, these people came here to talk, not fight." "Talk?" Morrison's laugh was harsh. "With the same savages who've been raiding our settlements for months? The same people who called off their attack last night to try negotiation instead," Sarah shot back. Chief Nalnish urged his horse forward, his weathered hands empty and visible. "I am Nalnish of the Chiricahua. I come in peace to speak of ending this war. The only peace you'll find is at the end of a rope," Morrison snarled, but Sheriff Williams stepped between them. "Colonel, you're in my jurisdiction now. These people have safe passage for this meeting." "Your jurisdiction?" Morrison's face flushed red. "When it comes to hostile Indians, I have authority anywhere in this territory." Ayana finally spoke, his voice carrying despite his injuries. "Colonel Morrison, I surrender myself to you willingly. But first, let these people finish what they came here to do." "David, no," Chief Nalnish said sharply. "It's the only way, Father." Ayana dismounted carefully, then walked to the center of the circle. "Everyone here needs to understand what's really at stake." He turned to address both groups. 3 days ago, my people planned to attack Cedar Ridge during the Harvest Festival. Women and children would have died. The next day, soldiers would have burned our camp. More women and children would have died. His voice grew stronger. "We stand at a crossroads. Down one path lies endless war until one side destroys the other completely. Down the other lies something nobody has tried before: actual peace." "Pretty words from a killer," Morrison sneered. "Yes, I've killed," Ayana admitted. "Just as your soldiers have killed, just as settlers have killed, but I'm tired of killing. My people are tired of dying." He looked directly at Jim Crawford. "You lost your brother in a raid 2 years ago. I led that raid. I'm the one responsible for his death." Crawford's face went white, and his hand moved toward his gun. "But killing me won't bring him back," Ayana continued. "It will just create more orphans, more widows, more reasons for revenge. When does it end? When you're all dead or driven out." Crawford spat. "Then it never ends," Chief Nalnish said quietly. "Because we have nowhere left to go. This is our home too." Sarah stepped forward. 3 years ago, I would have agreed with Jim. When Thomas died, I wanted every Apache to pay. But hatred didn't bring my husband back. It just made me empty inside. She looked around the circle, at faces filled with pain and anger. "We're all here because we've lost people we loved. But we can choose whether their deaths mean anything or not." "What are you proposing?" Mayor Patterson asked nervously. Chief Nalnish straightened, despite his obvious pain. "Boundaries both sides can live with. Your people keep the lands you've already settled. My people keep the high country where we can hunt and live as we choose. Between us, a place where we can trade, your tools and medicine for our horses and hides." "And who enforces these boundaries?" Sheriff Williams asked practically. "We do," Ayana said. "Together. Mixed patrols to watch for troublemakers on both sides." Morrison laughed harshly. "You expect civilized people to work with savages?" "I expect civilized people to act civilized," Sarah snapped, "which would be a welcome change." The colonel's face darkened, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Everyone turned to see an older man in a black suit approaching on horseback. Sarah recognized him immediately. Judge Warren, the territorial magistrate. "Judge," Sheriff Williams said with obvious relief. "What brings you out here?" "Word reached me about an unprecedented peace negotiation. I came to see if it was true." Warren's sharp eyes took in the scene. "What I find is the same old pattern, talking past each other instead of listening." He dismounted slowly, his age evident in his careful movements. "Colonel Morrison, you have no authority to interfere with legitimate tribal negotiations. Sheriff Williams has jurisdiction here." "Judge, you can't seriously consider—" "I can, and I will." Warren turned to Chief Nalnish. "Chief, are you authorized to speak for your people in these matters?" "I am." "And you, Sheriff Williams, can you speak for Cedar Ridge?" "The town voted to authorize this meeting, yes, sir." Warren nodded. "Then let's stop posturing and start negotiating. Mr. Ayana, I understand you speak both languages." "I do, Your Honor." "Good. Then translate every word exactly as spoken. No editing, no interpretation." The judge looked around the circle. "We're going to hash this out properly, or I'll have both sides arrested for disturbing the peace." For the first time since arriving, Sarah allowed herself to hope. The negotiations took hours. Judge Warren proved to be a masterful mediator, forcing both sides to address practical concerns rather than emotional grievances. Boundaries were drawn on a rough map, trade agreements outlined, and enforcement mechanisms established. The breakthrough came when Jim Crawford, still grieving his brother, asked a simple question. "What guarantee do we have that you won't just break these agreements when it suits you?" Chief Nalnish was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "The same guarantee you give us, our word, and the consequences of breaking it. Our children will grow up knowing each other instead of fearing each other," Ayana added. "Fear breeds hatred. Knowledge breeds understanding. As the sun reached its zenith, Judge Warren called for a final vote. All those in favor of ratifying these agreements? Hands rose slowly around the circle. First Sheriff Williams, then Mayor Patterson, even Jim Crawford after a long internal struggle. On the Apache side, every warrior signaled agreement. Only Colonel Morrison held out. "This is a mistake that will cost lives," he declared. "Mark my words, these savages will break their promises the moment it benefits them." "Colonel," Judge Warren said coldly, "your objection is noted and overruled. The agreement stands." As the groups began to disperse, Ayanna approached Colonel Morrison. "Sir, I believe I'm still your prisoner." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then spat in the dust. "Not anymore. Judge Warren's made it clear you're under tribal authority now." He mounted his horse and glared down at the young Apache. "But if you step 1 foot outside the agreed boundaries, I'll hunt you down myself." Sarah watched the soldiers ride away, then turned to find Chief Nalnish beside her. "Thank you," the old chief said simply. "You have given my people something we thought was lost forever. Hope." "Your son gave it to me first," Sarah replied. "I just returned the favor." As the Apache delegation prepared to depart, Ayanna lingered behind. "Sarah, I need to ask you something." "What?" "The trade agreement includes provisions for teachers, for people who can help both communities understand each other better." He hesitated. "Would you consider being one of those teachers?" Sarah looked out over the desert landscape that had seen so much bloodshed, now peaceful in the afternoon sun. "I'm not qualified to teach anyone anything. You're qualified to teach the most important lesson of all," Ayanna said softly, "that it's possible to choose forgiveness over revenge." 3 months later, Sarah stood in the schoolhouse of Cedar Ridge. But this wasn't the same building where terrified townspeople had voted for war or peace. This was new construction, built with lumber provided by the town and labor provided by Apache craftsmen. Half the students were white children from the settlement, half were Apache children from the mountain camps. And at the front of the classroom, 2 teachers worked side by side, Sarah Henderson, teaching reading and writing, and David Ayanna, teaching Apache customs and desert survival skills. It hadn't been easy. There had been incidents, misunderstandings, moments when the fragile peace nearly shattered. But each time, people on both sides chose to talk instead of fight, to build instead of destroy. Chief Nalnish had died peacefully in his sleep 6 weeks after the peace meeting, but not before seeing his first grandchild born into a world where Apache and white children played together. Jim Crawford still grieved his brother, but he'd also learned to appreciate the Apache knowledge that had saved his crops during an unexpected drought. Colonel Morrison had been reassigned to another territory, replaced by a younger officer who believed in the peace process. And Sarah had found something she'd never expected, not just purpose, but love. "Miss Henderson," little Maria Crawford called out, using the formal address the children had been taught. "David says his people have a story about why the moon turns orange in autumn. Can he tell it?" Sarah looked across the classroom at Ayanna, who was helping young Tommy Williams with his Apache vocabulary. Their eyes met, and she saw in his face the same contentment she felt in her own heart. "I think that would be wonderful, Maria. David, would you share your story with us?" As Ayanna began speaking in his rich musical voice about the ancient tales of his people, Sarah looked out the window at the desert landscape. In the distance, she could see Apache riders and white settlers working together to repair a damaged well. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect. But it was something Thomas would have been proud of. A beginning, a foundation on which future generations could build something even better. The orange harvest moon was rising again, but this time it brought not war, but the promise of peace. And in the schoolhouse where 2 peoples learned to understand each other, Sarah Henderson taught the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose hope over hatred, even when the whole world tells you it's impossible. As the children listened to ancient stories under the light of that eternal moon, Sarah knew that Thomas's dream hadn't died with him. It had just been waiting for the right people to make it real. The lonely Apache who had collapsed by the roadside had indeed been saved by her kindness, but in the end, it was his courage that had saved them all.